Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on October 13th, 2023 from karmicevolution.com or any of your favorite podcast stations. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. First, my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that a new show drops every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern. And if you do listen to the podcast on my website at karmicevolution.com, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent podcasts or search the archived listings for past ones that you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. And while you're on that page, you'll see a downloadable freebie labeled How to Keep Your Sun Sign Happy, which is friendly advice for every sun sign from renowned evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest about what each of us, depending on our sun sign, needs to be happy. And this downloadable freebie is based on an interview I did with Stephen a couple years ago, and he's given me permission to distribute it more widely as a means of promoting the validity of astrology in our lives. And yes, it will put you on my Conversations About Consciousness Astrology newsletter email list, but you can, of course, unsubscribe anytime. So please be sure to grab it when you listen to this podcast, whether you do so live or after the fact, and enjoy some astrological words of wisdom. Separately, you can always follow me on my Facebook page at Karmic Evolution for Your Soul and on Instagram at karmic.evolution. Now, in addition, if you would like to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart in order to gain greater consciousness about your soul's true mission and purpose in this lifetime, I am offering a 75-minute discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $125. And this offer is for podcast listeners only. So if you'd like to move from chaos to clarity about why you're here and what might be holding you back from achieving your highest destiny in this lifetime, this reading can reveal how the energies into which you chose to be born, or your soul chose to be born, might be holding you back now by keeping you stuck in old, habitual, past, or early life behavioral patterns. And understanding such soul-conditioned behavior can assist you to make different, more positive choices moving forward, especially in whatever areas are of greatest interest to you, your relationships, your career and your job, your finances, or your health. So if you'd like to co-create your own future happiness through astrological insight, this reading is for you. Conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable when you take advantage of my special discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading offer at karmicevolution.com/karmic125. And finally, I'm teaching an 8-week class titled Intro to Aspects, How to Get to the Heart of the Chart, starting on October 22nd. I'd previously announced this class was supposed to start this weekend on October 15th, but upon my return from my trip to Borrego Springs in Palm Springs, California, I promptly discovered that I tested positive with COVID. So, needless to say, I've been a little under the weather. I'm still recovering now, so I'm postponing the start date of this class from October 15th to October 22nd. But if you've become passionate about astrology, if you studied the basic meaning of the planets, signs, and houses, and are ready to learn what brings a chart to life, then this is a class you won't want to miss. And if you're ready to take that next step in your astrological journey towards learning to decipher the fuller meaning of a chart's energies, I'll help you hone your chart reading skills as we delve more deeply into the meaning of the major aspects. Now, if you know basic astrology, you've already studied the basic meaning of conjunctions, sextiles, squares, trines, oppositions, which are the Ptolemaic aspects, and probably quincunxes and some of the more minor aspects like semi-sextiles and semi-squares, and of course grand trines, grand crosses, etc. Now, these make up the skeleton of the chart, but this class is going to delve more deeply into how to use the analysis of or interpretation or delineation of these aspects to determine which ones are the major ones, particularly with an eye towards evolutionary astrology and their aspects or their rulers' aspects to the nodes and the rulers of the nodes, South Node of the Moon, North Node of the Moon. So if you're interested in taking your knowledge of astrology, I have met in the course of my studies over the last 22 years, many people who are astrology enthusiasts, have studied basic astrology, but still complain that they don't know how to read a chart in an overall way to get its basic meaning. So if you're interested in learning more about how to do that and perfecting your astrological skills, this 8-week course will now begin on Sunday, October 22nd, will be held from noon to 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time and run through December 10th. So the cost is $225 for the 8-week course, and if you're ready to take a journey into the beating heart of the chart to deepen your chart reading skills and become a more impactful astrologer, simply go to aspnj.org to sign up. The course is being given under the auspices of the Astrological Society of Princeton in New Jersey, and that's aspnj.org, where they will gladly sign you up if you go to that website. And if you have any questions about whether this class is appropriate for you, please feel free to email me with any questions at SHERI, SHERI, at karmicevolution.com. All right, so now let's get into this week's astro news you can use. And so first, I want to take a look back at October 8th, Mars-Pluto exact square. Now, I'd outlined last week the astrological dynamics, including this square, behind the chaos, disarray, and infighting in the U.S. House of Representatives. And as part of my delineation of the potential energies of tomorrow's Libra new moon solar eclipse, I had noted Bernadette Brady's interpretation of this Saros Series 7 South eclipses as bringing either a sudden crisis or a sudden resolution to an already existing crisis. So, to refresh your memory, I'd like to quote again Brady's delineation of this upcoming set of eclipses, both the Libra new moon solar eclipse tomorrow on October 14th and the Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse on October 28th from her book Predictive Astrology, The Eagle and the Lark. And that is as follows. The immense power, anger, and force of the Mars square Pluto is channeled into this family of eclipses via the trine, because the Mars and Pluto trine the new moon, she says. The individual experiencing this series will find that huge obstacles will suddenly and easily clear, or on the negative side, a pending potential crisis will suddenly manifest and move through his or her life very rapidly. Either way, the individual will feel that everything is moving at great speed. Now, I'd also mentioned last week Pluto's station direct in Capricorn, hitting the natal U.S. Sibley charts Pluto for the last time, which occurred on October 11th, complete with all the repercussions of triggering the first 248-year Pluto return in U.S. history, and the fact that Mars entered Scorpio late on October 11th or early on October 12th, depending on your time zone. So to go back to the Mars-Pluto square, which according to Brady is really the gist of the flavor of these two upcoming eclipses, Mars square Pluto often depicts violence. It's the energy of the personal will versus the collective will. Since the square occurred while Mars was still in the sign of Libra, or partnership, and Pluto was still retrograde in Capricorn, we have dissatisfaction with current partnerships causing pushback against traditionally rigid resistance. Now, Pluto, excuse me, is the planet, of course, of social reform and collective trauma, but it is in Capricorn, and that's where the rigid resistance comes from. So we can note now that the resistance in the U.S. House of Representatives against changing rules, such as making it so that it takes more than one representative who objects to the current speaker to spark a vote by the entire House to oust him or her, that, we can see how this square, which was strongly waxing on October 7th as the world woke up to find out that Hamas attacked towns in Gaza and Israel. And as of today, and I'm recording this actually on Thursday, October 12th, excuse me, I'd like to read from today's piece in the New York Times, and I quote, "Days after hundreds of Hamas fighters from Gaza rampaged through border towns in a surprise attack that killed at least 1,200 Israelis, the region is bracing for further conflict. In response to the shocking incursion, Israel has been pummeling the Gaza Strip with airstrikes, and the Palestinian Health Ministry has said at least 1,400 Palestinians have been killed. Israel has mobilized 360,000 reservists and troops are now massing at the border, leading to speculation that Israel will soon launch a ground offensive. And in a region with a long history of conflict, Israel has also reported shelling along its borders with Lebanon and Syria, exacerbating fears of a wider conflict." End quote. Okay, so I want to preface all that I'm about to say now with the disclaimer that I'm not here to espouse my own political views or opinions, though I certainly do have them. Rather, I want to try to stick to the astrology of what's precipitated current astro news you can use so that everyone might learn more about how astrological energies work and what's potentially the possible outcomes of current conflicts and explain astrologically why those might be the ultimate outcomes. But if I slip up here and there, I'm saying mea culpa now. I am of the mindset that abused become abusers if they do not ever properly heal from their abuse, and that this then becomes a perpetual cycle with no end until we have the courage to look at our trauma, face its devastating effects, and implement healing techniques. I'm not saying this is a quick process. However, it's one way that the world can begin to heal on a collective level, in my opinion. My new phrase has become, "as above, so below, don't you know?" Ha. Now, that victims who become perpetrators simply perpetrate more trauma in the world is not a disputable fact on a psychological level. And there are many facets to the way those traumatized either act and or react to future circumstances. For that reason, I want to give a brief astrological analysis of the energies leading up to this sudden conflict between Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah, the former situated mostly in Gaza, a small strip of land that contains 2 million Palestinians, half of them under the age of 18, unable to leave, and the former situated mostly, the former was Hamas, which was in Gaza, and the latter situated mostly on Israel's northern border with Syria and Lebanon. The dispute there tends to focus on Israel's West Bank expansion by right-wing Orthodox Jewish settlers who are pushing further into former Palestinian territory prior to the establishment of Israel in 1948. And that area is and has been a flashpoint because it houses several both Jewish and Islamic religious sites. So here's a little history from Wikipedia. The West Bank, including East Jerusalem, has a land area of 5,600 kilometers plus a water area of 220 kilometers consisting of the northwestern quarter of the Dead Sea. It has an estimated population of 2.7 million Palestinians, and over 670,000 Israeli settlers live in the West Bank, of which approximately 220,000 live in East Jerusalem. The international community considers Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem to be illegal under international law, though Israel disputes this. A 2004 advisory ruling by the International Court of Justice concluded that events that came after the 1967 capture of the West Bank by Israel, including the Jerusalem Law, the Israel-Jordan Peace Treaty, and the Oslo Accords, did not change the status of the West Bank and East Jerusalem as Israeli-occupied territory. Alongside the self-governing Gaza Strip, the Israeli-occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem are claimed by the State of Palestine as its sovereign territory and thus remain a flashpoint of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So, having noted all of that, let's look back at this past week's events, keeping in mind the culmination of tomorrow's Libra new moon solar eclipse, and try to see what the astrology has to tell us. So again, on October 7th, the day before the Mars-Pluto square exacted, was also an anniversary in Israel, as it was 50 years ago on October 6th, 1973, that Syria and Lebanon waged surprise war on Israel during the sacred Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, and even that became known as, the Yom Kippur War. At that time, the U.S. and Russia backed different sides. At this time, with the Libra South Node, transiting Libra South Node, Mars conjunction, opposing the Aries North Node conjunct Eris, the goddess of discord and chaos, which I spoke about at length on last week's podcast, as we approach the exact Mars-Pluto square on October 8th, and we're waxing into or toward tomorrow's Libra new moon solar eclipse on October 14th, and heavily flavored by that Mars-Pluto square and the potential for sudden crisis, as per Bernadette Brady, it seems that while history doesn't necessarily repeat, it often rhymes, as my friend astrologer Mitchell Lewis used to say. Now, alignments and realignments of partnerships now, given current politics, has become obvious, especially as the right-wing government of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has invited back into its embrace more moderate politicians to form a unity coalition government during this particular crisis. I said last week that this upcoming solar eclipse, which brings both luminaries together at 21 degrees and 7 minutes of Libra, combined with Mercury in Libra, exact opposing Chiron in Aries, the wounded healer, and all of them approaching the transiting Libra South Node, currently, as of the eclipse at 24 degrees and 52 minutes of Libra at 10:55 a.m. Pacific time and 1:55 p.m. Eastern time on October 14th, will cause a realignment of partnerships, potentially of the enemy of my enemy is my friend type. Now, the issue then becomes, who is my enemy, especially as the U.S. has been trying most recently to get the Saudis to warm up to better Israeli relations. U.S. President Biden has, at this point, repeatedly emphasized U.S. support for Israel. And, of course, the United States has sent not one, but redeployed, I should say, 2 aircraft carriers to the Mediterranean. One is already there, and the other one is, I think, departed or is scheduled to depart soon. This is all a mechanism for walking the United States talk about supporting Israel. Now, I had said, we should watch for Vladimir Putin of Russia's statements, although I believe he's been silent up to now. But it is particularly ironic, and I just wanted to point this out, that, because Russia invaded Ukraine by painting the Ukrainians as Nazis, and that was one of his major reasons he gave for invading their nation, that it's kind of ironic, right? Because Israel comes out of the Holocaust, which was the work of the Nazis, and Russia invaded Ukraine saying that it's filled with Nazis, and now we have this conflagration in Israel formed by having given the Jews out of the Holocaust as victims of the Nazis land for themselves. Do you see where I'm going here? This is like a little bit of a triangle, right? So as I mentioned last week, we're still under the relatively early part of the cycle of the auspices of last January 12th, 2020 Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, and the potential realignment of international partnerships over the next 30 plus years. Now, I may be going out on a limb. I really don't know. Maybe it's just my anxiety rather than my rational mind working, but it feels like we're on the precipice of the potential of a World War III. Now, Americans, of course, are always kind of removed because we're simply removed geographically from many other parts of the world. And so, there may be some disbelief about that. But, and a little later, I'm going to talk about when transiting Uranus hits the natal Uranus in the U.S. chart, which has precipitated our joining international forces in a world war. So, but first, what I'd like to do is take a look at Israel's natal chart, which took a hit to its, hang on, because I changed the chart by 5 minutes. So, give me a second, the 405 chart, May 14th, 1948 at 4:05 p.m. in Tel Aviv, Israel, is the accepted chart for the birth of Israel, and it has a 1341 Scorpio South Node conjoined by Chiron at 2124 of Scorpio. So, what I'd like to do is inform you, which I might have mentioned. I don't think I mentioned it last week because we didn't talk about Israel at all because it really wasn't on the radar at that time. It happened, after I recorded the show. So the Israeli South Node, natal South Node, at 1341 Scorpio, took a direct hit on May 5th of this year, 2023, from the Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse on that date at 14 degrees and 48 minutes of Scorpio. And this upcoming eclipse tomorrow is Israel's chart will take a hit to its natal 20. Okay, this is where I have a difference again. Hold on, because I just moved the chart slightly. 2406 Libra ascendant at the tomorrow's eclipse, which is again 21 degrees and 7 minutes, and that this eclipse has the luminaries. It has the luminaries at Chiron at an exact. I'm sorry. It has, when I speak extemporaneously, I fall over my words, so forgive me. Mercury is at 17 Libra. The luminaries have crossed over Mercury, but they're still conjunct because they're at 21, right? Libra. I mentioned the degree of the transiting South Node, and that Chiron is at 17 Aries, so the tight aspect is Mercury opposite Chiron, but they are all moving into a opposition to Eris, which is at 24 degrees and 45 minutes of Aries. So clearly the luminaries are waxing towards an exact opposition to Eris. which will happen a couple of days after the actual eclipse. All right, so this is by no means over yet, but what I'd like to do now is share with you evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest's delineation of a Scorpio South Node and a South Node in the first house, which is where Israel's resides. And then I'll discuss the repercussions of this upcoming set of eclipses happening now. And I'll remind everyone, too, that I mentioned in my last podcast that according to astrologer Bill Meridian, who wrote a book on the subject of eclipses, that their major themes generally tend to manifest or arise within the collective or our personal lives within 3 weeks leading up to the actual lunations. Now, again, I think both this Israeli situation and the issues at hand currently in the U.S. House of Representatives, which I spoke again about quite a bit last week, and where we're at an impasse as of today. I believe they're meeting. I'm not sure if they're voting. I haven't heard the latest news, but Steve Scalise from Louisiana is the projected speaker, but he doesn't yet have enough votes to actually take that position and hold that gavel. But again, these are part and parcel of this eclipse series themes of sudden crisis outlined by Bernadette Brady. And I'll preface also that what I'm going to read is by saying that Stephen Forrest is delineating the natal node by sign and house, meaning for individuals, but we can look at the birth chart of Israel, which again is May 14th, 1948 at 4:05 p.m. in Tel Aviv, Israel, as the personality of the collective population that makes up its citizenry. So here goes, and according to Stephen Forrest in his book Yesterday's Sky, a South Node in Scorpio. And this is what he says, so bear with me, because he is quite a good writer in the sense that he paints pictures with his words. And here I quote, "There are things in life that can freeze the blood in our veins. Human depravity and incomprehensible human suffering. A child in fearful agony, dreadful bodily dysfunction, sadistic violence, a person's state of mind 1 minute before jumping in front of a train. None of us want to get very close to those places, but sometimes unbidden, they get close to us. Terrible dark events do happen, and when they do, they leave marks on the souls that experience them. A person with the South Node in the sign of the Scorpion, and here we're looking at a country, has known such extremity in a prior life. One possible response to this kind of experience is to become numb. But Scorpio does not do that. It does not turn away. Dissociation, Forrest says, lies more in the dark side of Aquarius. Here, we see the imagery of the heart as an open wound, shocked and dumbfounded, but still taking in the nightmarish perceptions, unable to break the gaze of the dragon. There is an atmosphere of deep seriousness here, and a corresponding vulnerability to loss of perspective, to gloom and suspicion, especially regarding the lighter, more playful dimensions of human experience. There is also possibly some hard-won wisdom and potentially compassion, too. The key here, from the evolutionary point of view, lies in recognizing that souls often evolve rapidly when faced with extreme hardship, as this individual probably was, or this country, in a prior lifetime, or the citizens of this country. Again, a man or woman captured and chained on slave ship, even one that sinks en route, may learn more about life and themselves in a year than a more quote-unquote fortunate person learns in a safe lifetime. Still, such a path of soul growth obviously entails serious wear and tear on the attitude, not to mention the persistent scars that tragedy always leaves in its wake. Taking it one step farther, we must recognize the fascination that the dark side of life exercises upon the psyche. A quick perusal of what is playing at your local movie houses will quickly confirm the existence of humanity's weird, ambivalent attraction to the dark. Strange as it may seem, the very realities we fear most seem most to pull us. Back to the movies. Can you imagine a sexy movie star who isn't also at least a little bit dangerous? Sexiness is a quality that cannot ultimately be separated from the shadow. Sexy people seem to beckon us to face our own hunger and need, and to pay the price of passion. With the South Node in Scorpio, there's a good chance that in prior lifetimes this individual carried a strong quality of sexiness. You can count on that if the South Node is linked to relationship symbolism, if it is conjunct Venus, for example, which it is not. He's teaching here, and I'm sorry that I'm digressing a bit. But he says, along with the depressive psychic wear and tear, it is the attachment to heaviness that constitutes the deepest obstacle for a person with the South Node in Scorpio. And that, I think, applies extremely well to the nation state of Israel. Forrest continues, the gravitational field of his or her unresolved karmic wounds pulls the person ever into deeper waters, even when the higher path is a simple, pleasant stroll along the beach. And that brings us to the North Node, which lies in Taurus. And in the Israel chart, it lies in the 7th house of partnership. Here, the evolutionary emphasis lies in the area of calming down, literally of getting over the processes that brought this soul to its present state of agitated, psychologically complex wisdom. As always with the North Node, the work is challenging and it goes against the natural grain. This person, this nation, has come into the world to find comfort. In earthy Taurus fashion, that comfort must be concrete, a timely hug rather than a pithy insight, a bath and a nap instead of a serious talk. Such individuals benefit a lot from living away from urban areas. If possible, urban areas if possible, or at least in getting out of town as often as possible, blah, blah. He says, in relationship, such a person benefits from trying to move towards a simple, instinctual acceptance of the partner. That is key here, right? Instinctual acceptance. We hear so much how complex the process of relating is, but for a person with the South Node in Scorpio, that is the last notion he or she need to emphasize. What he or she needs is more like the idea that life is easier with a partner, and that, of course, we humans are typically happier with a mate than without one. This last line may not apply to everyone on the planet, but for this person it conveys the right attitude. Calm, naturalness, and a return to the simple senses are the path forward. Now let's move to his delineation of the first house, South Node in the first house. And he says, freedom, we all value it. And paradoxically, we dread its constant companion, which is uncertainty. In every truly free situation, we must make choices. Sometimes we are free to choose between pleasant, positive courses. Other times we are caught between a rock and a hard place. So with the South Node in Scorpio, based on his previous description, we're talking rock and a hard place. Much of the time we have no idea what kind of outcome a given choice will bring. There are no guarantees. Will marriage bring joy or sorrow? What about having a baby or moving to the coast? With the South Node in the first house, this individual, this nation, has felt the weight of that kind of freedom over and over again. In prior lifetimes, he or she has faced circumstances that demanded decisive action, typically without enough information to be absolutely confident. There was a certain hardening of the attitude, and bridges had to be burned. I think it's pretty obvious that as Israel is mobilizing 360,000 of its reservists and current troops on the borders of Gaza, that we are looking at decisive action and potentially without enough information to be absolutely confident of a positive outcome. I did not mention, but of course the world knows that there are 22 Americans who have been killed in Israel and Gaza, and that there are 150 hostages still being held, and that a certain amount of them, I think they said 14. The number keeps fluctuating. By the time this podcast airs, it may be more decisive. I do not know. but at least 14 of them were Americans or Americans with dual citizenship with Israel. So we're talking about Israel here, but I'm just pointing out that, there is a general hue and cry from the UN and from other particular nations about Israel moving too fast, to retaliate. And I read some of that, I think, already. But these dramatic past life choices, Stephen Forrest continues, have affected not only the self, but also the lives of others. That is because first house energy correlates with leadership. The leaders have followers. Further, while leaders often appear to be clear and certain, their inner reality is often far shakier. Such a person must make life-shaping decisions without any way of knowing if they are right or wrong. For this individual, these pressures created a self-contained quality, as if no one on the outside can see his or her inner process with any clarity. He or she can be impressive, radiant, and seemingly transparent, yet ultimately elusive. So, and I may talk about this before this podcast is over, but, we're talking now about the fact that the May 5th, 2023 eclipse landed on this South Node, and we're talking about letting go of this kind of leadership, right? Letting go of revering perhaps the leaders of Israel and people like Benjamin Netanyahu, prime minister there, who favor retaliation without giving consideration to the larger consequences, right? And the fact that many Israeli citizens are angry with their government and Netanyahu in particular, right now, because they feel that he led to this conflagration. This is all easily researched, so I'm not going to go into the details. Anyway, back to Stephen Forrest, who says, even though the first house tends toward independence, we immediately know that there are relationship issues here, if only because the cutting-edge North Node must be in the 7th house, which is the traditional house, he says, of marriage. Choosing or not choosing a mate is one of our ultimate inalienable human freedoms. But once the hormonal veil of falling in love begins to lift, we recognize that in loving, we give up a lot of precious freedom. He's talking about compromise. With the South Node in the first house, this individual has to come to that crossroads and choose to go down his or her, with the South Node in the first house, this individual has often come to that crossroads and chosen to go down his or her own road alone. Often there simply wasn't a partner with sufficient ego strength available to hold up the other end of the relationship. Here we must also lay on the table the possibility of relationships forming in the past life scenarios, but relationships in which the person was isolated by his or her own dominance over a weaker or needier partner. I'm sorry, but if that doesn't describe Israel's history, nothing does. Okay, back to Stephen Forrest. Another scenario involves the dependent partner, a condition which may, in origin, be psychological or practical. The partner becomes debilitated. This prior life conditioning had pumped so much energy into his or her natal authority and compulsion to take personal responsibility that the delicate interpersonal balancing act of partnership was no longer available. With this nodal configuration, it is quite possible that this individual, this nation, has had significant rivals, enemies, or competitors in previous lifetimes. Look to planets in square or opposition to the South Node for details. If so, we will see plenty of evidence for that tension in the present lifetime as well. So let me pause for a minute and go back to the natal Israeli chart and note that its nodes at 1341, and this is the mean node because that's how I calculated, so it's there's probably closer to 14 in the true node, that it is trined actually by Juno, the goddess of partnership, and sextile the South Node. Juno trines the South Node and the Chiron, and sextiles the North Node in the 7th house, but it does so from the 5th house, which to me would indicate that perhaps some kind of individuality, creative, that the partners recognize the creative talent and resources of both parties, right? That house, however, is ruled by Uranus's Aquarius, where there may be a sort of trauma, right? It's the trauma around recognizing each other's positives as creative solar individuals who can coexist together. But the big part of the South and North nodes aspects are taken up by the fact that Pluto and Saturn are square to the nodes. Now, Saturn, Pluto in Leo in the 10th house, Saturn, Pluto, this was, Israel came about after World War II, the end of the Holocaust, and the beginning of the conjunction of Saturn to Pluto then, and martial law coming about in Europe. So the formation of the modern European Union, as well as the Iron Curtain, the post-World War II Russia's infiltration into eastern Poland and many of the nation states that became part of the USSR, right? Okay, so I digress when I didn't plan on it, but we know that this square to Israel's natal nodes is huge, right? And that there's a huge amount of resistance here that did not enable this nation to move towards what we're going to talk about now, Stephen Forrest's delineation of the south of the North Node in Taurus in the 7th house. So he said, the balancing act, the delicate balancing act of partnership was no longer available. With this nodal configuration, it is quite possible that this individual has had significant rivals, enemies, or competitors, and that's the Saturn-Pluto square to the nodes. But the North Node lies in the 7th house, the traditional house of marriage. While it would be dogmatic to say that such a person must marry or similarly bond in this lifetime, it is essential to recognize that the evolutionary intention is the weight of the karmic pattern pulling this person towards self-sufficiency, caretaking, insulated positions of authority, and clueless isolation. This individual needs to learn to listen, to depend on other people, and to surrender to certain carefully chosen partners. The core evolutionary issues are trust and commitment. Many of the natural goals of the life can only be fulfilled in partnership, the kind of situation in which each person has talents and skills the other one lacks, which I just gave voice to. Each holds half of the treasure map. Only by entering into a relationship characterized by seeing through each other's eyes and listening through each other's ears can this person and his or her natural partners actually do the great work. Okay, so there you go. I mean, this is Israel's evolutionary soul mission as a nation. And so far, I think we can pretty clearly see, again, without getting too political, that it has not accomplished this goal. So, I want to point out again that in addition to the October 14th solar eclipse hitting the Israeli natal ascendant within 2+ degrees, also that transiting Uranus came within 1 degree of conjoining its natal sun in the 7th house at 23 degrees and 39 minutes of, I'm sorry, it came with, hold on. Sorry. I got ahead of myself. Yeah, so in addition to the actual, the North Node is in the 7th house, but the Israeli natal sun is at 23 degrees, 39 minutes, just over the cusp of the 8th house in Taurus, all right? And therefore, it forms a tighter opposition to Chiron in the 1st, which is really kind of on the cusp of the 2nd, so we could read it that way too, about wound to its own sense of self-value and self-worth, right? Which makes it, of course, even harder to move towards the North Node of partnership in Taurus, calm, measured partnership, right? Where you can heal our trauma, or in this case, Israel can heal its collective trauma by attempting to see through the eyes of others, their trauma and their perspective, right? Now, many people, both around the world and in Israel, are of that mindset. So, we can't tar the nation with only one brush. But those who have been in power, especially recently, and Netanyahu's been in, I don't even know, I think it's at least 12 years, if not more. He was in power, out of power, back in power, and has grown increasingly right-wing. That tolerance for understanding, never mind appreciating, never mind welcoming the other's point of view, has been either non-existent or extremely difficult. So it was July 28th of this year that transiting Uranus came within, it's stationed at 2305 Taurus, so that was within 30 minutes of the natal Israeli sun at 2339 Taurus, right? And on August 29th of this year, it's stationed retrograde. Okay, let me say that again because I'm confusing even myself. On July 28th or thereabouts, transiting Uranus conjoined the natal Israeli sun when it was at 2339, but it stationed on August 29th at 2305. So it never actually got as far as 2309. It came within approximately 30 minutes of the Israeli sun in the 8th house. And then it won't hit the Israeli sun exact, meaning at 2339, until around May 22nd or 23rd of next year in 2024. And that will be almost exactly a year past its Scorpio South Node, Scorpio full moon lunar eclipse conjunction from May 14th of 2023. I'm sorry, that's not May 14th, isn't it May 5th? Again, I got confused. But yeah, hold on. I got it right here. I'll tell you all. My Virgo rising likes to be precise. The October 14th eclipse is the 2107, and the lunar eclipse at 1458 Scorpio was on May 5th. So it'll be almost a year when transiting Uranus hits the Israeli sun exact, approximately May 22nd or 23rd of 2024. It'll be almost exactly a year after the May 5th Scorpio lunar eclipse hit the Israelis' South Node in the first house. So to backtrack away from the Israeli situation alone for a moment, I want to say that, we had and still have Mars, although it's moved into Scorpio, opposite Eris, which is on the North Node, right, in Aries, that's going to stay. The Aries North Node and the Eris conjunction by mean node won't perfect until October 21st, but will stay conjoined within a degree until circa mid-November, right? So Mars opposite the dwarf planet Eris of chaos and discord has brought us a U.S. House of Representatives that's speakerless, Hamas declaring war on Israel almost 50 years to the day of the Yom Kippur War from October 6, 1973, which ironically is also during the Chiron return in the U.S., which is not over yet. And not one, but two, and actually now I think three, 6.3 magnitude earthquakes in Afghanistan. That is another thing that was a result of this Mars-Pluto square. Now, I would call that chaotic for sure. So as we wait to see what the Libra new moon solar eclipse will actually bring, I think it's pretty clear that it's brought sudden crisis. The question is, will that sudden crisis result in a sudden resolution of the crisis, right? And we know that the upcoming eclipse tomorrow is hitting Israel's ascendant. So it was asked to jettison some of its old fears and problems with relationship, but that when it hits the ascendant, it also opposes Israel's natal Pallas Athena, the goddess asteroid of the scales of justice, right? Very much a Libran archetype on the descendant and inside its seventh house. So, again, this becomes all the more interesting when we realize that a certain percentage of Israel's military has been protesting over the past year Prime Minister Netanyahu's attempts to weaken the Supreme Court there. And, that has been kind of put on hold now during this war. So I'd like to point out several symbolic happenings as the U.S. has had its Pluto return triggered, and as we're on the verge of Pluto re-entering Aquarius for the long haul, but not until November 2024. We're dealing with it retrograding back and forth between Aquarius and Capricorn, where it is now as it's stationed direct, and entering for the long-term Aquarius. So there's a lot of resistance going on. I spoke about capitalism in the U.S. and all that kind of stuff, but this podcast apparently has no room for that right now. But that's, during this period is while the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest judiciary body in the land, denied women the right to bodily autonomy and to make their own healthcare choices in tandem with medical doctors' advice with its Dobbs decision on June 24, 2022. And since then, we've had the erosion of the power of the judiciary court system in Israel as well during this same period of time. So meanwhile, as Americans want to protest things like Iran's morality police and their violent actions against girls and women who don't wear hijabs in public places, Americans must face some of their own hypocrisy on this score. I mean, don't you think? What I mean is that how can one set of people with laws restricting the rights of women, and I'm talking about American women, rail against the atrocities committed when a teenager boards a train in Iran, sans hijab, and the result is that she ends up in a coma. While we don't know what happened, the supposition is that she was beaten by the morality police on the train and then taken to the hospital and, in a state where she was comatose. Likewise, we have Israeli denial that their own traumas at the formation of their nation as a result of the suffering and loss of more than 6 million Jews during the Holocaust, and of course, yes, we know many other people as well, has over time resulted in their ghettoizing of Palestinians in a land where they formerly had freedom of movement. And you remember that during the Holocaust, Jews were first ghettoized, then moved to labor camps, and then to death camps, or just immediately to death camps. So just as Americans have whitewashed the beginning of this nation, or this nation's history, by downplaying for years the atrocities settlers perpetrated against Native Americans, driving them off their lands, killing not only men but women and children as well, so have the Israelis done the same with the telling of their history, at least initially in their early years. There are plenty of sources through writers, both Israeli and Palestinian, who recount the history of the settlement of Israel. So I'm not asking anyone to take my word for it, but rather to research it on your own. One of the books I remember reading is dated now, but it was published in 1984, but details some of the taking of Palestinian villages by force, similar again to the early settlers versus Native Americans here in the U.S. initially, and how this was conveniently erased by Israeli history books and the teaching of its children. That book is called Arab and Jew, and it was written by Adam Shipler, who was just before that the bureau chief of Israel for the New York Times. So all we need do now is draw a parallel comparison to note the dispute over black history in this country to understand what I mean. As these eclipses approach, whitewashing history so as, quote, not to upset anyone, that's a Libran shadow side tendency, is bound to upset those whose side of the story is left out. So I haven't time left in this podcast to say a couple of the other things that I wanted to talk about, but I will leave that for a future date. Next week, of course, I will delineate the Scorpio, I'm sorry, not the Scorpio, the Aries lunar eclipse. And hang on, because now I've lost I've lost track of where I am, and this happens every show, you guys. Yeah, the Taurus full moon lunar eclipse, which happens at 5 degrees and 9 minutes of Taurus. So we are going to talk more about that, because clearly that's going to pit the Scorpio moon opposite the Taurus sun, right? So more fun is yet to be had. But I wanted to mention that today the news held, amidst all of these union strikes with the UAW, the United Auto Workers, with the SAG-AFTRA actors still on strike, that their talks apparently fell apart today. But meanwhile, other unions have made great gains. We also have Kaiser Permanente, the medical people, the union of the people in the medical industry, in the hospital workers, out on strike, as far as I know, still. So there's a lot going on there also. And the question is, how long have the powers that be ignored the viewpoints and the problems and the issues of the people who work for them, and if and when will they see their point of view, right? So whether or not there is going to be progress on some of these, it does appear that unions have gained in power over this short period of time, and that there may be more concessions coming. However, right now, as the eclipse approaches, the actors' strike is, they've ceased negotiations for at least this, hopefully, short time period. So I'm signing off now and thanking everyone for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on October 20th for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.